Welcome to the Ranch Workforce Project, a limited series collaboration between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program, a project to address the domestic labor shortage on farms and ranches, a project to replenish the pipeline, a project to attract new people into an old industry, a project to face what has to change from within. Because the future of agriculture doesn't just depend on land and livestock, it depends on people. And now, your host, Haylie Shipp.
Every working ranch has two stories, the one that's behind us and then the one that we're still trying to write. The Ranch Workforce Project lives in that space, where tradition meets transition, and where the future of ranching depends on people, who we bring in, how we train them, and how we make room for the next generation. In this first episode, bringing new hands, new ideas, and new energy into the agricultural workforce, we are joined by Marty Ropp. Now, Marty has spent decades working in the beef genetics world and recently launched New Acres, a nonprofit that is focused on connecting people with life-changing careers in agriculture. I am Haylie Shipp. Alongside me, co-host Rachel Frost. Rachel is with Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program. It's a program that blends academic instruction with hands-on, on-the-ground ranch internships to prepare students for real-world ranching systems. So, Rachel, let's get started. Let's get some more depth as to why this effort is something that you're taking the time for.
Thanks, Haylie. Yes, I am the program lead for the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program at Montana State and the Ranching Systems degree. And what we're seeing here is students who are really excited and want to make a career in ranching but don't have any experience. And also the industry on the flip side of that is really in need of labor and coming in at all different levels. And they need some experience there. So we're trying to find solutions to that nexus where we can bring in these eager, interested, but ultimately ignorant folks into the labor workforce and make it benefit both sides of that industry.
I'll speak to my part a little bit with Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and why we thought that this was a great effort to partner with Rachel to bring this podcast out. We have a large mission, but part of that mission is making sure that people in agriculture, and specifically to what we do, ranching primarily, never feel like they have to sell their land out of production agriculture. And traditionally, that always used to look like handing it down to the next generation, and figuring that out. But now we're starting to get more and more creative with that solution. And whether or not that next generation might be somebody that wants to get into ranching and maybe get into a leasing situation, or maybe it's a completely out there idea of we're getting into something with VSETH Cattle Company where Ranchers Stewardship Alliance will own the property, but bring on other people that are able to graze that land. Not one size fits all for anybody. We always say it depends, but just making sure that that land can stay in production agriculture in support of wildlife habitat and in support of rural communities. So that's what we're really all about. Marty, how about you?
I'm in the beef genetics business. Been in the beef cattle genetics business about 25 years. I've got my own company, Allied Genetic Resources, and travel extensively in support of our seed stock business, which is everything from genetics consulting, genomic work, marketing work, feeder cattle sales, all kinds of things. Work with a myriad of producer types and sizes. And we've got owners in 25 states. And so I'm on the road all the time. Whether or not the direct customers of ours who are primarily beef cattle producers, or whether they've got a diversified kind of a ag business, which most do, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what segment of ag it is. They're struggling in the labor situation. And for the next 10 years, as they look out, they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Probably they see something worse. And so from that, and from sitting at a lot of kitchen tables and riding around in a lot of pickup trucks, I decided that it was time to at least begin an effort to try to address some of those things. And so we started an ag employment recruitment not-for-profit called New Acres, with an idea of recruiting from a different base maybe than agriculture traditionally looks at.
I think, anybody that's listening to this is probably from somewhat of an agricultural background, and we've done somewhat of that job of setting the stage of that. It's just, you know, there's always the percentage. It's like 2% of the United States makes up, agriculture. I'm sure it's less than that now. That was a number from years back. And then, you think that it just continues to decline. I think the number between the last two censuses was a 7% drop in the number of farms in the country. You can look at all the numbers. The statistics are there and the numbers are dropping. But how did we get here? Rachel, from your standpoint of, continuing to teach students that are interested in agriculture, why are we seeing this drop off?
That's a great question, Haylie. And just to add to those statistics that you just brought forward about the small percentage of Americans that are involved directly in agriculture, what I find astonishing is that within the College of Agriculture at Montana State University, a land grant institution, agricultural state, still ag is the main number one industry, 70% of our students identify as coming from an urban background. We're at that interesting place where we're attracting these students that don't have any ag background, but have a tremendous interest in it and want to ultimately make that their career pathway. So how did we get there? I think part of it comes back to a generational issue. And I'll put myself out there as an example. So I'm a Gen Xer, grew up in the 80s. Ranching was really hard. So was farming. Interest rates were high. We had nationwide drought. So a lot of my generation left that farm and ranch. Technology was just coming on. That was the future. That's when all of the schools began to drop their programs where they were doing the trades, and saying, oh no, there's no future in the trades. Everything is going to be in technology. And so my generation moved to Denver. We moved to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And that's where we started to create our careers and our purposes. For example, I'm in academia, right? But I grew up on a ranch in West Texas. And now those generations are ready to retire. They're trying to find help. And there's not the kids to come back to it. We've already established our careers in other places. I'm not ready to move back to the ranch to take over. But what I also find is even though 70% of those students don't have that direct connection as far as growing up on a ranch and being urban, when you ask them in the classroom to raise their hand as to whose grandparents had a ranch or a farm that they got to go visit, then you find that there is a majority of those students who have that connection that maybe has skipped a generation. So I think that's one reason that we're in the boat that we're in. Also, we've treated our kids poorly in this industry. We have had them work extended hours. We have not paid them. You have the privilege of growing up on this farm or ranch and being part of it. And they have seen that they can be paid and maybe treated better in other industries. And so we have both sides of that, where we have, in essence, we've exported our own internal labor, and then we've maybe not done a great job of attracting all of this, the people that are truly interested in living in a rural place and having a lifestyle that's directly connected to food and agriculture production.
For those folks that are watching the video portion of this podcast, my lighting, you can see, goes bright and then dim. And that's just one of the benefits of living in rural America, is power surges. So Rachel, it timed out perfectly as you were talking about living in rural America, and I'm having the old ranch house power bumps. So Marty, do you have anything to add as far as how you think we got to this situation of really being in dire need of more folks to add to this workforce?
I think I see the issue as being a lot about family size and farm numbers. And you talk about the drop in farm numbers. The drop in farm numbers has primarily been driven by the drop in profitability per acre or per unit of production. And so farms have been forced to become larger in order to be a profitable kind of a unit. When that happens, the 8 families that used to live in the area that's now farmed by one family have a lot less children. And our family sizes as well, back maybe, and I'm going to go way back, but maybe 50, 70 years ago, there might have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 children per family, and 8 farms in an area where there's now one farm. That one farm has 2 children. And so from from looking at a partially trained workforce of 50 or 60 young people that grew up in the same area, now we're looking at 2. And if one of those or both of those decide not to stay in that rural community, then at that point, it becomes a crisis kind of a situation. So our rural communities have gotten smaller. The schools have gotten smaller. The businesses have left our rural communities because of those things. And this is not insidious. It's just what happened. It's the nature of what happened, primarily because we've lost farm numbers and family sizes are smaller. I'd always tell the story, but there were 11 people within about 5 years of my age that grew up on the section that I grew up on in Central Illinois. 11 kids my age. And my brother is now the youngest person that lives on that section of ground. And he's obviously no spring chicken anymore. But from a huge potential workforce, and every one of us could drive a fence post or drive a tractor or plow snow. All of us, bale hay, all of us could. And now that workforce has shrunk. That partially trained workforce that we've counted on in agriculture for hundreds of years, that pipeline's drying up and dried up. And if you look out for 10 to 20 years in the future, that pipeline is maybe more dry than it is now. You go to a lot of these operations we go to, the guy working at shop is 75 years old. And he's been there and he worked there since he was 20. And there's no one that he grew up, a mile down the road, and he loves his job and he loves being there. But there's no one to replace him or her when they're finished. And so I look at this as a recruitment challenge of we've got to have new humans. We have to have new humans to repopulate rural America so that the estimated 1 million jobs that we're short of in production agriculture have any chance of being filled. Because I tell this story too, but more young people graduate high school in my hometown this last year, which isn't a huge place. Bloomington Normal, Illinois is not huge. More young people graduate high school in Bloomington Normal than graduate high school in eastern Montana. So if you're looking for human resources, there are more logical places to look than the place we've always looked and always counted on, because that well is going dry.
Marty, you said there, as you were responding, partially trained, kind of referring to these agricultural kids that could drive a fence post, could drive a tractor. And I just got back to our family ranch and I'm now the main operator. And trust me, partially trained is the exact description of how I feel. So kind of expand on that a little bit more.
Well, and this, until the last generation is done with the ranch, you're always partially trained because you're not right half the time. But no, we grew up around livestock and we grew up around equipment and we grew up around, we learned to do things. We learned how to put water lines in and wire a barn for electricity. Even some things they won't let us do or don't want us to let us do anymore. But we were trained for a life in production agriculture. And we were trained decision making and understanding biological systems and understanding machinery and things like that. We were ready to go to work for the neighbor. And we adjusted, we learned more throughout our whole lives. We were prepared for that because, and one thing I really like, and I can't remember his name, that Rachel that we were on a program with, that said the job description for a ranch manager is, what was the word he used? Not illogical. It's when it wasn't impossible, but it was in that range. The job is the things that you have to know. No one can do that unless you've done it your whole life and you were trained to do that. So we have to work on systems like that. But that's what I meant by partially trained is we knew enough to be ready to go to work the day we started working for someone else or ourselves.
So let's talk about this new pipeline. What are we going to do about this? That's just a great reality of the desolate nature of places like eastern Montana, as opposed to some of the communities that you see in the Midwest. And, with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, we talk about this all the time, bringing folks in. Everybody says, oh, I would love to have a ranch in Montana, but do you really know what it feels like to be in South Phillips County, that stretch of mid-January to late February when you don't see a soul? It's an isolated area and it's an isolating industry, and it's hard. It's not just the cultural aspect of it is hard, let alone the work aspect of it being challenging. So as we came up with the topic for this podcast, Rachel and Marty, you came up with bringing new hands, new ideas, and new energy into the agricultural workforce. Rachel, what do you see from the collegiate front as far as this new pool of potential agricultural workers?
I think there is a broad pool there. They think there's a broad pool there. There's people that are coming with passion that they think is passion. Maybe it's infatuation right now at this stage. That's sort of what I challenge. So, a little background, I teach a freshman level class called Careers in Animal Agriculture. And so, all of the students that take animal science or ranching systems are required to take this course. So, I have 70 students in here. We met for the first time this semester yesterday. So, I see all these fresh faces that really intend to make a career in animal agriculture. And you're right, Haylie, they don't have a real idea, especially if you remember that 70% of them probably come from an urban area. But I think one thing that we do as an industry potentially is that we discount them. We do tend to stereotype people because we know it's hard in Eastern Montana. We know it can be really brutal in the wintertime. Quite frankly, we build ourselves up. Well, I can take this, but not everybody else can. So that's great. It's part of our industry, makes our industry great, is that grit and that pride in what we do. But we also need to be a little bit more open to giving these people a chance. So I didn't say in the introduction, but the program that I lead is a 4-year Bachelor of Science in Ranch Management. And the premise is to create students that have, well, not to create, to take students that have that potential and to provide them with tools and backgrounds and foundations in 3 principal key areas. One is livestock production, the other is natural resource stewardship, and then the last one is financial management. And if we can provide them foundations in those 3 critical areas, then they won't graduate prepared to manage a ranch, because as Marty was talking about, it was Dan Leahy that mentioned, that the actual job description for a ranch manager is completely far out. It's unattainable, right? There's so many skills that you have to have. But if we can provide them a foundation, and then they have to go out and they have to work and put in the time to build the rest of what they need to do as far as skills. What I think one of the things that needs to happen is, we as a university need to prepare students better. It's not just we're taking in any wide-eyed student and we're just dumping them into the field of agriculture and saying, that's great, you love animals, you're going to be fantastic. Because we do need to give them a healthy dose of reality. In my class, I have what I call the Dream Killer Lecture that takes the students that think they're going to own their own ranch when they graduate, and we put a little perspective in there. And so, sprinkling, opportunities and all the things that are truly out there in ag with some perspective and with some reality. And then also getting students on the ground as much as possible. Students want to be on the ground. They want to experience that. They want to understand what it's like. And so, being able to maintain the ability that we have at Montana State to put students with livestock, to put students out in situations as much as possible is really important. And then as an industry, just really understanding who are these kids? What are they coming out with? And not necessarily criticizing them for that, just being aware that they're lacking some of those, even those preliminary training things that Marty and you were talking about. So it's the situational awareness, the understanding of where do I stand in relation to livestock to get them to turn? All of those things that we think are inherent because we grew up around it, and these students don't have it. It doesn't mean they can't learn. I mean, we can teach all kinds of skills. The thing we can't teach is aptitude and willingness and desire. And so I see a big pool of that. I see a big pool of desire. I see a big pool of willingness. I see a big pool of good attitudes. It's just, how do we make that connection and bridge that gap between this potential and then the reality of where we need those students to actually engage in the workforce.
Rachel, as you're saying that, I just felt called out in the middle of your answer, because as you're saying 70 bright-eyed students that want to work with animals, I'm thinking, how many want to be a large animal vet? And I have like the judgment going on in my brain. But you're exactly right. As an industry, that's not helping us get to where we need to be. So realizing that these are people that have the interest, how do we make sure that we can build them up after we give them to Rachel, let her do the kill the dream speech and make sure they've got the realistic expectations, and then get to that next point. So you are in the situation where at the college you have 70 or so students brought to you each year. They're paying to be there. Marty, with what you're doing with New Acres, it's a totally different approach because you are really soliciting for folks that might be wanting to get into this industry without the background. So explain how you're approaching these new faces and how you attain them, what you go through with the process.
I think it's a little bit of a tiered approach because when Rachel gets students, they are headed in that direction. They're already interested. I was just doing a little quick math in my head, and I think if you just look at young people 18 to 22 or 23 years old, there's about 20 million of them in the United States. It's about 20 million of them that are trying to decide what they want to do with their life, and they've got different. They think about things differently than I did. I'm not going to talk about them years ago, but they think about things, and they have talents that I don't have. We talk about things that they don't know, like how to spot a sick pig. There are things that they don't know, but from a technology standpoint, they're vastly ahead of any of us that are within 15 or 20 years of my age. So there's new things that they can bring. But the disconnect, Rachel brought up the disconnect, that's an issue, I think, at all levels. Even though I live just outside of a 180,000 person Twin Cities. And again, talked about the students that are there. But McLean County is one of the largest ag counties in the world. Corn and soybean production, a lot of times, is number one for both. And so we're a huge ag community with an urban community stuck in the middle of it. And the young people in that community still don't feel like, most of them don't feel like they're welcome or that there's opportunity in agriculture, even though they drive by agriculture every day. And they're very, very close to agriculture. I spoke to an FFA group, a local FFA group, about a year ago. There were 70 young people in the room, wonderful sized, young FFA kind of a group, and asked them, how many of you are interested in careers in agriculture? Almost every hand went up. There was a couple of them that didn't. Almost every hand went up. And I said, how many of you believe that that's what you'll end up doing with your life? That you'll spend your life working in some sort of agriculture, either here locally and about 8 hands went up. That's it. The rest of them were interested in a life that maybe in the production agriculture career, but they saw themselves. So I asked them some more questions, and for the most part, they kind of laughed at each other's answers. But they said things like, "Well, I'm not really a farm kid. I don't drive a pickup truck, and I don't know how to talk about." I don't know the difference between liquid 28 and anhydrous. I mean, I don't speak the language. I don't dress the right way. And I won't probably, I don't feel accepted as a potential, employee in agriculture. And yet almost everyone that I know in production agriculture in our county would have a job fair there that day and visit with every one of them and talk to them about the potential to come and help them with their operations, particularly as their operations become larger and more technical. So I really believe the disconnect is in any feeling of interest, and the rural-urban interfaces are full of young people like this. We don't keep track of some of these things anymore because we're a long time out of junior programs, but there's over 1 million young people in FFA now, which is more than twice as many as there was 10 years ago, and a lot more than when I was in it, again, a long time ago. Those young people are interested in agriculture, and if we're not able to recruit them and make them feel welcome in agriculture, they will go do something else, and those talents will leave and go do something else. And other young people that aren't involved in those programs, that are curious and talented, we need them. We need to let them know they're needed. And that's what New Acres is about trying to communicate with people, and young people particularly, although young people could be 35. They're still pretty young. Communicate with those folks that there are opportunities everywhere in agriculture, regardless of where you want to live, regardless if you want to raise organic peaches, or if you want to run a feedlot, or if you want to work. It doesn't matter what it is. There's opportunities coast to coast in agriculture, and particularly in food production agriculture. And so take a look. Just take a look at what's available. And that's what our effort is about.
Haylie, if I can add one thing to that, just to totally back up what Marty said, I did say that I do a dream killer speech, and that's because most of the students that come in with an interest in ag, it's driven by animals, and so they either want to own a ranch or they want to be a large animal vet, and they just don't know. Even our ranch kids don't know where else that they can plug into that industry. And so that's the whole reason why we do this class. And I think that that's a disservice that we're doing to some of these students who are really interested, but also intimidated by agriculture, is just helping them understand that you have skills that are needed at all these different levels of the industry. And here are different places that you can bring those skills and you can bring those interests. And even though you may not be directly owning those animals because that capital outlay is just prohibitive, that there are so many ways that you can connect and that this industry needs you and they need those talents and stuff. Yeah, it's not just about telling them you can't be there, but it is about saying, here's some realistic expectations and some real ways that you can connect and bring what you have to offer to an industry that needs you.
And Marty, you alluded to the technology. Some of those jobs aren't even existent yet, but they're coming if that's what somebody's interested in. They could probably create their own job down that avenue. As we talk about this and we talk about, okay, we've got this level of person who's probably interested in agriculture, but we're not quite making them feel welcome, or we're not quite bridging them into the industry. How do we get them to take that leap? Marty, I'll start with you.
That is a fantastic question. And I think there's a couple ways that we're looking at that. And again, one is casting the net extremely broadly, in that we're going to have to start off with millions to get thousands. I think that's the nature of whatever it was. It's the nature of NFL football. They start with millions and they end up with hundreds. So in order to start the recruitment process, we can't think small. We have to think large. And then as we draw interest by, I think there's other ways to help draw interest, promoting rural lifestyle. I think there are lots of folks in urban or rural urban settings that are today reevaluating their lives and reevaluating what's important to them. And they're not as happy living in, I won't pick on any particular cities, but living in that city as they were, because things have gone downhill. I'll just put it that way without getting political. Things have gone downhill. They'd like their children to go to a school that was safer. They'd like to be in a community where it was a little bit lower pace and where there wasn't someone that lived 10 feet from them. I think that interests folks, again, like it may have hundreds of years ago, that there's opportunity to have, from a lifestyle, rural communities perspective, and using that as a recruitment tool, I think is fair and smart. So I think that's one of the things is we talk about, not only is this a career, it's a change of trajectory of life for folks that are looking for a change, talented folks who are looking for a change. And other industries have done that successfully and moved people to places that Rachel talked about. And I think those same opportunities exist for us. Then once we have their interest, then programs like Rachel's or programs like so many of them that are blossoming around the country can take that interest and turn it into something concrete and something that actually is meaningful. But first of all, we have to get their ear. We have to get them. We have to be trending. We have to find a way in our industries to be trend. I don't even like that stuff. But if we're not trending, we're not going to recruit any young people. And so that's what we're after.
And so, Marty, as you're saying the we in this, who is doing this work? I mean, is this something that we need to join together with, multiple ag industry organizations to jump together? I mean, who is going to take the lead in this? Because this is an issue for everyone across every part of ag. That
is a fabulous question, and I do not have time. And we're still putting in it. I'm committed to the effort, and we're doing, we think we're doing in our business what we can to help do this, but it is going to take consensus. And Rachel, 5 years ago, we would have never had this conversation. Even though the problem was there, we would not have had this conversation. Lots of reasons. One thing, and I pick on our people that I work with, if you have enough help, then ag labor is not an issue. You just don't think about it. And if you don't, then it's the most important issue. If you don't have somebody to come, it's the most important issue in the world. And so we have to come to consensus across industries. And again, I work in the beef business. That's what I do. And I've been in the livestock business my whole life, but I have lots of friends and clients that are in lots of businesses. All those businesses need to come together and ante up and say, we're all in this. All of us are struggling to do this. And what helps one of us will help all of us. Because some of these young people that are recruited, maybe they come out to work on a ranch in Glasgow, but they end up going, I kind of like the fertilizer business better. And so they go to work in town doing that. And maybe they become a regional district salesman. Whatever happens, they're going to migrate into other industries, but they have to they have to get their feet wet somewhere. We used to get our feet wet because we grew up that way. And now it's going to take a concerted effort, across disciplines to do that. And so we've talked to folks in lots and lots of different industries and said, is this something that you're willing to come together, maybe in some sort of a roundtable forum, and say, all of us are in this together? Because none of us can be successful. Membership organizations, businesses, ag lenders, none of us will be successful if our ultimate customer isn't successful. And so that's how I see it. And I think that kind of consensus, you led right into what we believe. Communication to create that consensus is what's going to happen, because ultimately it's going to take an investment. This will not happen for free. And whether that's ag discipline investment, whether that's government investment, whatever that is, it's going to take investment to solve an issue this large.
Rachel, I think this is a good juxtaposition with a lot of what you've been saying, because again, you have the eager workforce there. There's some drill down to figuring out which ones are going to stick with it. But yours is almost the getting the employer invested in this workforce that Marty is talking about attracting. And so, you guys are talking about either sides of the same coin. So do you have any strategies? I know you do internships and such with different locations throughout the state. How do you get that buy-in from the folks that are going to be bringing this workforce in?
You asked the perfect question there to lead into. Yeah, you're right. Marty and I are essentially on different sides of the issue, and that's what's so great about this, is that we're having those conversations. Marty said 5 years ago we wouldn't have been having this. If you look on podcasts now, all of them are addressing ranch labor. I think this is the only one that's actually looking at it, though, with that student perspective, with that young workforce in mind. But you're right. As an industry, I really am looking for a specific kind of rancher. I'm looking for a rancher that's willing to recruit differently than they have before. I mean, it costs a lot to recruit people. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of patience. So typically in ag, what we've wanted to do is get that person in at 20 and keep them till they're 70, right? That's the best investment that we could have. And so it's changing a perspective of realizing that having these inexperienced workers in for shorter periods of time can actually be a win for you. It can make you a better manager. It can bring in new perspectives that ask questions and about why you're doing things the way that you're doing, and have you really think about those things again. And so it requires someone who's willing to challenge themselves in their operation to think a little bit bigger, because that's what these students do, is they challenge you to think bigger. Trey Patterson, who is the manager of the Padlock Ranch, brought this to mind and put it, I think, really, really well. He said, we used to struggle a little bit with how we would invest in our employees, and we got heartburn because we'd invest in them and we train them, and then they would leave and they would go somewhere else. And so we struggled. Well, do we invest that much in them? Do we wait until they've stayed for a certain amount of time before we start training? He said, and we finally really came to peace with the fact that this is one of the ways that we contribute to the industry, is that we invest in these young people. And just like you said, Haylie, they might go somewhere else and they might end up working for the neighboring ranch or a ranch across the US. And he said, but we also begin to see benefit, because sometimes they would go out and they would do that, and then they would get more skills, and then they would come back to us because we invested in them as in the beginning of their career, and we showed them that we cared about their trajectory. And so then we have seen actually started to reap the benefits directly of investing in those young people. And so those are the ranches that make the best intern hosts. As part of the ranching systems major, students serve 2 summer-long internships on ranches. So they go to the same ranch 2 summers in a row. And I really strive for it to be a win-win situation, but that depends on that ranch host and how they're viewing that inexperienced help and how much they're willing to invest in them. It costs time. I heard Dan Leahy has said that internships are a tax on ranch owners and ranch managers. In some ways it is, because they're not cheap. But if you can see the value beyond the immediate work that you get out of them in your growth as someone who can understand and manage people, your growth as a business, as you begin to invest in the next generation and you start to see their perspective and understand why they're questioning things that you do, I think that there's tremendous value to the industry in investing in these young people and really changing our perspective on the way that we see inexperienced help.
Well, we are almost out of time. This has been a tremendous discussion. Marty, do you have any final thoughts that you want to depart with today?
I don't have anything special, but I want to go a little bit farther with what Rachel said, because I think you said some things there that hit me pretty hard from just the mentality of working with young people. And I've worked with young people my whole life. I've been a college professor. I've trained up staff, through my experiences in my past life and our experiences with Allied. And if you're enthused about teaching young people and about they come in with new ideas, and yeah, some of them you shake your head, and sometimes they leave the water on all night or whatever it is. But if you have the mentality that, me too, I just if you have the mentality that that I'm enthused to have a chance to help a young person get better, then whether they stay or whether they go somewhere else, it's a rewarding experience. And those rewards come back to you with lifelong friendships and relationships, and maybe their cousin that comes and works for. If you embrace that kind of thought process, that, we're doing the right thing for agriculture and the right thing for my operation at the same time, and I'm enthused about it, versus, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to teach them how to do this, and you got to check all the fluids in the tractor, and I'm going to teach somebody else this. If you look at it like that, it's not going to work. And if you look at it the other way, I think the rewards, not only from an employment standpoint, but from a personal growth, relationships, all those things, is rewarding. I think that can be really rewarding if you'll think about it that way. And I think that's what you were getting at, Rachel. I like that a lot.
Well, the Ranch Workforce Project just getting underway. Of course, as I said, this is our first episode, and we're going to have multiple episodes here dropping every few weeks. Rachel, you have done a phenomenal job setting up the guests and the structure for this. Why don't you just let folks know a little bit, just general terms, what they've got to look forward to here in the coming episodes?
Yeah, thanks, Haylie. I really appreciate the partnership with Ranch Stewards Podcast to do this. But we're going to do some honest conversations with some of the things that are really challenging on both the student side and the industry side. How do we effectively onboard seasonal employees? I mean, if we only have them for a short period of time, how do we get the most out of them, but also invest in them while they're there at that time? What about ranch and farm culture? Are we attracting people, or are we driving people away by the way that we do our day-to-day operations? And down to the nitty-gritty of pay and compensation. And if we can't write that big check, are there some creative ways that we can compensate employees with things that really get back to that lifestyle that Marty was talking about and how important that is for this coming generation? We're going to dive into some of the training programs, like other ranch management degree programs, and what is attracting students to them and what the value that they're bringing to the industry is coming out of these programs as well. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to talk about: apprentices versus internships. How do we approach those differently? I think we're going to have some really honest conversations that are going to hopefully help people see things through a new perspective. And just like Marty said, we've all got to be all in at all different levels in how we are setting these young people up for success, how we're bringing them into the industry, and how we're filtering through who's truly got a future there. There's two things I tell students within my program, and that is 2 keys to success. One of them is an unquestionable work ethic. The second is an unquenchable desire to learn. If you have both of those, the world of agriculture is your oyster right now. There is so many ways that you can be absolutely successful.
One of those conversations that just feels so good while you're in it. Thank you to Dr. Rachel Frost. Thank you to Marty Ropp for joining me on the Ranch Workforce Project. The discussion doesn't end here. Join us again in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about the differences of seasonal labor interns and apprentices on the Ranch Workforce Project.